Hail and well met, traveler, and welcome to Tavern Watch. I'm your host, Joe Perez, and with me are my traveling compatriots and co-hosts, Matt Rossi and Liz Harper. How you doing today?
Howdy, howdy.
Things are happening.
Indeed, things are happening, and pretty much everywhere, and including recent news and what's been going on with the tabletop space. So much so that we decided that this is essentially a part two to what we first discussed with Wizards of the Coast and the OGL. That's probably going to dominate a good portion of our discussion. And before we get to that, I don't know if Liz, if you wanted to mention anything specifically about, you mentioned that there's another book coming out that you're kind of excited about, but not kind of excited about. Do we want to talk about that before we go into the OGL stuff?
Yeah, sure. We can lead with this. Keys from the Golden Vault is a new D&D adventure anthology. It's due out on February the 21st, or you can pre-order it with a physical copy, which also gives you early access to the digital copy, which means you could be reading it right now. That's a whole situation I don't know what I think about that. That's weird and awkward, and it cuts your local game store out of it. And like, if I want the special cover that you only get from local retailers, I have to order it digitally and then go to the local retailer. Like, it's a whole complicated thing. It's like these digital physical bundles. Like, the advantage would be simplifying this, and instead it's just as complicated, if not more. But it's an anthology of adventures about heists, and they all sound really fun. And I really want to play this book, but at the same time, Wizards of the Coast has also been really screwing stuff up now, and I don't even know if I should be excited about a new Dungeons & Dragons book. I haven't even pre-ordered it yet, not even the digital version. So, I don't know. What about you two? Are you familiar with this book? Are you excited about it or interested in it?
I'm familiar with it. The thing is Wizards has put out a lot of really good content. I'm, divorced from the things we'll be talking about today. They put out a lot of really good content over the past, I'm going to say 2 years.
Oh, yeah.
And I've gotten a lot of it. Some of it, I didn't have to pay for, but a lot of it I did. And I'm kind of at the point where it's like, unless there's a really compelling reason for me to spend money on a book of adventures, I'm just not going to do it. With like a Spelljammer had like campaign ideas stuff in it. You could run like a whole campaign. You could use do your own adventures, but you would have the setting to play in. Whereas this isn't. I compare it to Journey Through the Radiant Citadel, which was, I think, one of the better books they've put out, and the adventures are really interesting. And I actually liked. I managed to run part of one for you guys briefly, and
it's just having time.
It's time, and there's a lot of other things to it. Like, this always happens with games. They always, someone once pointed out that this is not a profession. Like, working in role-playing games, for a very few people, this can be your job. But for most people who are in the hobby, who are in there professionally, it's their second job.
Yeah.
Because it just isn't enough. Like, there's not enough product being sold. So every company makes more and more of it. Like, they just, we have to get more books out because we need to get more money.
Well,
and it's not like, I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, but we always end up at a point where there's just so much stuff that, it's like, I can't get the Kryn book and this book and Spelljammer. And, it just, at some point I've got to make a call, and the vault has so far been, I'm going to not buy that. Not that it's bad, just that's been my call.
Yeah, and I'm sort of in the same boat, right? Like, this is something that I would normally be very, very excited about. And as somebody who works on the retail side of the hobby as well, it's something I would also be very excited about, because usually this is the time where we're like taking pre-orders and getting them set aside, and, putting up like the alternate covers and trying to secure those. But after everything that's happened recently, and in the conjunction with what Matt's talking about, there's not enough demand right now. And even though, like, the idea of the core concept of these adventures is something that I'm super into, I love running heist adventures and things like that. there's just too much product when it comes to Wizards. There's sort of like this flood of books that come out, and you don't really realize it until you take a step back and take a look at your bookshelf sometimes. I've bought every 5th edition book that's come out, minus a handful that we did receive for review. My shelf is full. My shelf is full to the point where like I have to buy a new bookshelf because it is falling down with the weight of these books. But then the other day, I'm sitting here trying to find spots for some of the other books that I just got in, and I'm looking at them and I'm like, when's the last time that I pulled the Icewind Dale book off the shelf? When's the last time that I pulled, the Hall of the Storm Giants and all those books off? Like, I've bought them, and at the time I used them, but they just sat there because once I got what I needed out of them, I either transferred it over into like notes or whatever, or in a lot of cases, Wizards has released some of the content in those in other compilation books. We talked about Mordenkainen's Multiverse and Tome of Foes and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything and Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Like, all of these compilation books took some of the best bits of almost every publication that they had and just kind of threw them in there, which is good and better for people that didn't buy the other books, but it's like that lowers the incentive to buy those books too. And I don't know if I can in good conscience give them my money with what they're doing with the digital stuff, because this is another sticking point for me too, right? And this is not the first time they've done this. They did this with Dragonlance. They did this with Kryn, where order it and you get advanced digital copies of it before anywhere else, but only if you get it directly from them. And it's a special physical bundle and all this other stuff. And they're trying to push people into a digital format. And we've already talked about it where like digital format's good, but it's a double-edged sword, because if you do that, the people who buy those digital ones or buy the books directly from Wizards at the same price that they would buy it from a local game store are then not buying it from a local game store. And that
and the margins are so thin in RPG retailing that doing anything, like the idea of not just having the digital option, but making it so that that's the fastest way to get it. Like, do you want it now or do you want it in 3 weeks? Well, if you want it now, there's our digital option. It's like you just basically kneecapped your retailers.
You only get the early access if you buy the digital physical bundle.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to buy the full bundle.
Yeah. So you have to buy,
You've got to buy it.
You can't just order online digitally.
Yeah, you've got to buy it from Wizards specifically, which is, it's like, it literally reminds me of those hockey movies where a guy is skating towards the goal and suddenly someone just comes in and smashes him. And yes, this is my moment of Canadianness. But seriously, it's like that's what Wizards is doing. They're literally capping people. Like, it's like, wow. Okay.
But this feeds into a larger picture though too, and we talked about this a little bit last time, and it feeds into the OGL stuff. Is there's been a push under Hasbro for what's called Blueprint 2.0, and that is squeeze as much money out of your product lines as you can. And part of this was spawned from the fact that in 2021 and 22, the WotC side of the house, which Hasbro had largely left alone at that point, mostly, not totally, saw that Magic became $1 billion product line. And because of that, now they want all of their product lines to be $1 billion product line. And how do you do that? You edge out retailers, you edge out distribution, you maximize what you can get from that. Because again, if they don't have to print a book, that reduces the physical cost, that reduces the cost of production. If they're charging the same as a retailer, they're making a higher margin on that for the return on investment, because Matt said the margins are razor thin. Out of a $60 book, the retailer might make $15, maybe. And that's before calculating overhead. Just throwing that. And then you constantly inject product, because the more you do product, the more content you put out there, the more money people are spending, the more money you're generating in a year. We talked about this in one of our first Tavern Watches, and we even talked about this with Greg when he was on the podcast. They used to release maybe 3 books a year, sometimes less.
When 5th edition first came out, it was not churning out content.
It was a steady cycle. And now we're averaging 4 core books and usually 4 supplemental books that are also published either in conjunction with Wizards or are supported or sort of advertised by Blizzards or by Wizards. Wow. Yeah. Sorry.
Blizzards. We got to start covering
I keep
something that
thinking of
isn't a Zerd sound.
Yeah, I keep thinking of the Simpsons meme of Marge walking in yelling at Bart, but it's Lisa that's doing it, and Bart going, "What did I do?" And Marge goes on, "I'm sorry, it's just force of habit." Sorry, go ahead, Liz.
We do know that Wizards of the Coast is putting out 6 Dungeons and Dragons this year, which is a lot. That means every other month we're getting a book. So we're getting one at the end of this month, and then in 2 more months we're getting another one. We are getting Keys from the Golden Vault is this month. Then we're getting Bigby Presents Glory of the Giants, which will be everything you ever wanted to know about giants. Maybe
it's like the dragon book that they put out last year, but for giants. Yeah.
Yes. How do you even say this? The Flandelver campaign?
Fandelver.
I know that's it's classic D&D. See, sometimes they put out these classic D&D things and they mean nothing to me, and then everyone else is really excited. And part of the problem is they don't seem to advertise these things very well. They don't seem to explain them well. It's like they expect you to know what this is, and I don't know what this is. So it just
if it makes you feel any better, I never played it.
Yeah.
So. We are getting Planescape, though.
So we cannot know things. We cannot know things together. But yes, there's Planescape. There's the Book of Many Things, which I think is going to be really interesting. I'm looking forward to that one. And that's it. That is it.
Yeah, that's pretty full. Yeah,
but that's plenty of stuff.
And don't get me wrong, like Planescape is something that I would normally be very, very excited about. I love Planescape, and if they were to announce a Dark Sun book, I'd probably lose my mind. But it's too much. So now I'm at the point where I have to pick and choose what I'm picking up in a year, which is fine. It's kind of how it should be. But my collecting brain is going to go haywire that I don't have all the books. That's a me thing.
Yeah, for me, I got over that a long time ago just because I simply cannot do it. And with 5th edition, for a while, I could do it. Like, they weren't putting out that much stuff in a year. I think 2 or 3, and one of the books was usually just, like, Tales of the Yawning Portal, when it came out. It's like the prototype for all the stuff they've done since. I think it's the prototype for the heist book. The Golden Vault book is pretty much the Yawning Portal types. It's that type of scenario. And that's fine. But we're at a point now where, like, I couldn't get the Ravenloft book last year.
Yeah.
There's just so much stuff, and I was like, I gotta not get something. And I don't do a ton of horror gaming. I mean, I was gonna get Witchlight. I was gonna get, it just was like, okay, I'm gonna have to let something go, and it's gonna be Ravenloft. I mean, that's just, I'm not gonna use it enough to justify it. So yeah, it at the same time though, Golden Vault does seem cool. Like it's a different approach to adventuring. It's sort of like Candlekeep was.
Candlekeep, yeah.
Yeah, where it deviates, and Liz was doing an amazing Candlekeep campaign, and I'm sorry she didn't keep doing that.
It's so much. The thing is, I want to do the same thing we did with Candlekeep for Golden Vault, because it sounds like these sound like so many fun one-shots, except then it's such a project.
Yeah, and to be clear, we're not talking bad about the people that make the products or the quality of the products themselves, right? And I want to make sure that's perfectly clear to our listeners. We're critical of the speed, the cost that's associated with it as a consumer, the method of delivery, which has seemingly to try to push people more and more to a digital content release, also to a platform that they control. So if they ever decide that your account is done or you can't recover it for whatever the case, you lose those books that you purchased digitally. There's a lot of things that are not to like about what's going on, but we can still enjoy the D&D product. Now,
yeah, the game itself is not something I'm upset with. For me, the biggest problem here is just for me, the first one is just one of convenience and actual money.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't have the money. But another one is the fact that with all the stuff that's been going on, do I want to give them my money?
Yeah, and there's more too. There's a lot of stuff that's been coming out over the last few weeks. And I want to go into that a little bit because I think it is important to sort of talk about what's evolved since our last recording. And we talked about the open gaming license, and this is before any official statement from Wizards of the Coast about what they were going to do with it, what the reaction was going to be. We talked about that there was going to be a period of a new release, an updated version of it, and then a feedback period. And then they were going to respond with that feedback after that feedback period of 2 weeks and determine what they were going to do. Matt, do you want to talk about what their decision was after essentially getting bombarded with
Maybe.
no, don't do this?
Well, Liz, go ahead. You were saying something.
I'm saying maybe we should start by recapping the story so far for people who haven't maybe
fair.
entirely been following.
Well,
Why don't I
Liz,
do that?
Um,
I'll do that. I'll do the recap, and then Liz can talk about what
sure,
happened.
let's go with that. That works.
Basically, at this point, I want to say a month or so ago. I think it was around January 12th, but I don't remember for sure. But let's just say a month. A month ago, Wizards of the Coast basically had a leak. They didn't announce this. This needs to be clear. They did not announce this. This wasn't publicly announced. They had set up some kind of private channel with, I guess, retailers and influencers and people to distribute what their current plans were for the OGL going forward, what they were calling OGL 1.4. And amongst the things that this OGL did that were objectionable were clauses that would have given them complete ownership of anything you published under the OGL, that they could do anything they wanted with it and then pay you nothing. Like if you let's say you wrote a campaign setting about elf doctors, like it was like an elf medical soap opera game using the 5e rules, and it became very popular for some reason, like because people like elf soap opera. I mean, I look at World of Warcraft, and because of that, Wizards could then say, okay, that's cool, and they could just take your entire book and publish it themselves and sell it on their site, and there was nothing you could do. And that's just the first objectionable thing here. There were, they wanted to get a cut of people's Kickstarters. We talked about how anybody who's making more than $750,000 a year, which is admittedly not that many people, but anybody who was making that amount of money would have to give Wizards something like 25%, and you'd have to give them, I think was it 20 or 25% on the Kickstarter thing? Any Kickstarter
it was 25.
20% for Kickstarter.
Sorry, go ahead, Liz.
It was 20 for Kickstarter, 25 for other crowdfunding. Because Kickstarter was going to be their preferred crowdfunding partner, requiring a low royalty cut.
Yeah, they were making a deal basically, and there's more to this, but like seriously, we'll be here all day if I list everything that was objectionable about this. But the biggest one was that up till this point, the argument for the OGL has always been, well, if you as the people using this don't like a new one that Wizards puts out, you can ignore it and just use an older one. And that's exactly what people were doing and have done for years. When Wizards put out D&D 4th edition with a much more restrictive license that wasn't the OGL, people ignored it in droves and continued to publish stuff that was compatible with 3rd edition and 3.5, to the point where that's how we got Pathfinder. The original Pathfinder 1st edition, is basically D&D 3.75. It's a upgrade and redesign, but it's still basically on the same bones. And so this time around, Wizards was like, well, the first thing we got to do is get rid of that. So they, in their document that was, they basically flat out said, we're going to deauthorize the original OGL. You're going to have like not even a lot of time. I forget how much time it was, but it was like, you're going to basically, if you want to publish things, you have to use our new OGL. Essentially, it was like having a financial gun pointed at the head of anybody who's using the OGL currently. There's a lot of game publishers out there who are using the OGL, and they all would have basically been faced with this choice. So that was pretty bad. And as a result of it, there was kind of like, I don't want to call it a revolt, but I don't know what else to call it. Like, a lot of game companies were like, no, thank you.
An industry-wide visceral reaction.
Yeah. I mean, it was significant to the point where like YouTube was absolutely flooded with content creators who are like, look, I make videos about this game on YouTube. Am I have to give them like 25% of my money? Like, and one other thing I'm going to mention, and then I'm going to throw it over to Liz, is that this is something Liz pointed out, and that's why it's a good segue to her. The language of this new OGL was such that they had the right to force you into arbitration anytime they wanted. They had the right to use your stuff any way they wanted, and they had the right to change the terms of this OGL anytime they want. And they could change it on a case-by-case basis, meaning that if they decided that you shouldn't be publishing D&D stuff, they just flat out wouldn't let you. And they could do that. And they justified that by being anti-hate speech and anti-harassment, which is great. We like not hate speech and not harassment. But the language they chose was such that they could do it for any reason at any time. Like
There
they
wa-
could just decide we want more money, so you have to pay us more or you're done.
Yeah, and there was no clarification on the terms either, right? So like
Mhm.
they used terms like harmful and things like that, but there was no definition within it. So it was essentially, because they're the controllers of the license, they're the ones that own it, it would be whatever they had deemed was classified as that, right?
Yeah. So, but now go ahead, Liz. Take us through what's going on now.
Sure. So, I mean, this original thing was just terrible for content creators. If you made any kind of D&D content, part of this was because this was a leak, as Matt said, and there wasn't a lot of clarity about it. There wasn't clarity about who it would affect. So you had YouTube content creators, you had podcasters, you had all sorts of different people in the D&D community was wondering, is this going to affect me because I talk about D&D on my podcast, because I make videos about D&D? Am I not going to be able to do this anymore? Am I going to have to report all my financials to Wizards of the Coast and give them 20% of everything I make? And it would have even applied to things like homebrew content you've made that you may publish D Beyond, which can share homebrew content. So I think, Matt, you were saying that the community was in a revolt, and I think that's pretty fair. Everyone was up in arms like mad against this. We even had D&D. Everyone was canceling their D&D Beyond subscriptions because, as an act of protest. And it was going to the point where D&D Beyond's subscription page was down. You could not cancel your subscription because the subscription page was just non-existent. But there was a good side to all of this revolt, which is that Wizards of the Coast noticed. Wizards of the Coast noticed, probably Hasbro noticed, because they have actually really completely walked this back. I was astonished. They have said that everything in the systems resource document, the SRD, is now available under a Creative Commons license. That is 400 pages of the core rules of D&D 5e, including classes, spells, monsters, all available under a Creative Commons license. You can take it and do what you want to it as long as you attribute it back to Wizards of the Coast. You say they made it, but I'm using this stuff from it. It's a playground. D&D 5e is our playground now. We can do whatever we want in 5e. You can make all kinds of content. We do not owe Wizards of the Coast any royalties, no matter what kind of content you create. And I mean, this is the best thing they could have possibly done. They've walked back all of their edits, all of their royalty stuff, all of the stuff about claiming ownership. And now it's just like, okay, the 5e SRD is available under a Creative Commons license, and you can use it as you see fit. I think this is great. I think this is an amazing step. And I think it's a very smart move for Wizards of the Coast.
It is pretty much the only move they could have made.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, they could have not made it. They could have just not done it and let things get worse.
Fair.
They could have dug in. And that's kind of corporate America. That's what I would think the average corporate America big company would do. You dig in and say, no, this is mine. I want to make more money. I need to have enough money to swim in, Scrooge McDuck style. But no, I think this was the smartest decision they could have made. But I think it may be too late.
Yeah, I definitely, a lot of people have realized that up until this point, here's the thing. Up until this point, the OGL had a unblemished record of use. Like from the time in 2004, I want to say, when it first debuted up until now, so it's a solid 19 years, it had an unblemished record of use and people trusted it. They trusted what was told to them by Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast, that they could not, the document would always be there, and if you didn't like it, you could use an older version that was the one you did like. And as a result of that, people trusted it to make their businesses on. Go ahead, Liz.
In fact, we've already seen this happen because when D&D 4th edition came out, they tried to release it under something that was not the OGL. It was the Games Resource License, or they had a whole new license that was much more restrictive, kind of like they were trying to do with the new OGL right now. Except, when they rolled it out, everyone just kept using the old OGL that where you could access 3rd editions. They just kept using the old stuff because the new one was so bad, because it was so restrictive. And basically, I don't know whether to say, well, Wizards of the Coast learned nothing from that, or whether to say, oh, they learned the exact right lesson from that because they were like, okay, if we want to change this agreement to be more draconian, first we have to get rid of the original agreement, which is what they were trying to do.
I mean,
Yeah,
the answer is probably both, right?
I don't. Here's the thing: is I still don't believe that this was an idea that the average person at Wizards of the Coast, especially
No.
the game design people, wanted them to do.
And I do want to take a moment to shout out like some content creators that were covering this during the time frame. There's a lot of them, but like channels like D&D Shorts were actually covering like what they were hearing from internal sources, and that is actually very important. Because internal sources, the leakers and people who work there who are upset with this decision making, were letting things out at very great risk to their own livelihoods and their jobs and possibly their standing in the industry. Because let's face it, Wizards is the 9,000-pound gorilla that sits in the corner and is sort of like the biggest aspect of the tabletop industry, right? It's the largest one. Where they're talking about, the people that are making these decisions, some of them don't even play D&D, yet they're in charge of products, or they're in positions of power, or somebody who might understand is so hands off on the product and the management team that there's no oversight. It was an interesting look at how relatively disjointed upper management seems to be, and how out of line it was, not just with the product that they produce, but the consumers of that product. Right.
I'm going to say this too, by the way. Back in, I want to say September or October of last year, Ray Winninger stepped down rather abruptly as studio head for Dungeons and Dragons. Basically, the chief game designer, the guy who tells everybody else, this is the project you're going to be working on. Here's what we want out of it. That guy. And they didn't say much at the time. Like, I don't even think I noticed because it was so low key. But then when this stuff started coming down, it made a lot of sense to me, because I don't know Ray Winninger. We're not friends or anything like that, but I've been watching the man work for at this point, decades.
And he was a member of the community.
Absolutely. And more importantly, he understood, because he'd been there, how important the OGL was to Wizards of the Coast's development. The OGL, people keep thinking about the OGLs the way people who are creating can, get and use D&D rules in their creations. And it is absolutely that. But why is that something you want as the company that owns the rights? Why would you want people to be doing that? Because unlike in other fields where the impetus is on a work as a piece that you consume, this is collaborative storytelling. It only works if people are invested in it and want to use it. And by making theirs free for that purpose, that people could make their little adventures or what have you, you give them the freedom to do so, and in return, they are spreading you
that
all
right
over
there.
the thing. They're making your game the one everybody plays.
Yeah, and think about that. That's part of the reason why D&D became so ubiquitous with like tabletop role-playing games, is because you can make a one-shot, one-page adventure in the rule set for charity streams, or for introduction game nights at your local game store, or a kids night, or anything like that. And if somebody really enjoyed it, they could go, oh, where do I get more of this? But it was such content creators and people out there were making easy to digest content that was introducing whole new generations to the product. Like I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Like in retail, there's this thing where if you're my customer, that's great. And I'm going to treat you with all the respect that I can because you're helping me keep the lights on and food on my table. But I also really care about the impression that I make upon you, because at the end of that day, you're going to go and you're going to tell your friends, and you're going to spread the word. Right. And it's the same thing for content creators in the tabletop space. Like for D&D, it's why like local game stores are so important. You want people to run those games, because if somebody walks in and says, oh, hey, what are they doing? That seems like they're having fun, as they're laughing at that table and seem to be really enjoying themselves and are having a great time. And then that's how you grow your audience. That's how it stays relevant. Right. And by limiting that, by trying to put something out that sort of takes that away, you're disincentivizing folks from using it, from making that content. Like, why am I going to make a one-page thing or even more magic items or an adventure or anything and publish it under the new OGL when I'm not going to own it and you can just erase me from it, and I've done the work of introducing more people to your product to help support your business, but you're pushing me out. Like, it was bad. Like, it was not heat death of the universe bad, but it was pretty bad. Like, they were almost like cutting off their nose to spite their face, and it was pretty apparent.
What was it? I think, Liz, you were the one who said this. It felt an awful lot like, some lawyer who had never played D&D in their life wrote this document when you saw the leaked version. That was something you said?
Something like that. I mean, this did not feel like something a player wrote. It was very much legalese. It was very strict. It just did not feel like something that came from the people who made the game, who promoted the game, who loved the game. Because I know there are a lot of good people at Wizards of the Coast who love D&D and love the community. But this did not sound like something that any of them would have written or supported. It felt very corporate. And it was definitely not written realizing it was going to an audience of people who spend hours and hours of their day staring at arcane list of rules, looking for new ways to min-max and ins and outs. They did not know their target audience at all. This is exactly this. These are the people who are gonna read the whole terms of service, and they're gonna find the loopholes, and they're gonna use them. They're gonna argue with you about them, and
Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the industry response to it, because Matt talked about this before with the revolt, because the revolt wasn't just limited to consumers, right?
No, absolutely. In fact, there's a post up on Paizo talking about, this was on Thursday, January 19th. The post talks about the companies that have joined their ORC movement. The
Orc Alliance, yep.
Yeah. It's long. It's a lot of companies. Like,
And
you want me to read all of them?
No, but I mean, like, let's talk about some of the ones that people might have known, like Chaosium, which is... Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, maybe we should start by saying what the ORC is, which is
maybe
an alternative to the OGL. It's a open system designed for many companies to come out and publish their game rules so anyone can use them.
The open RPG creative license.
Yes.
And the interesting thing about it too is that it is basically it's targeting the thing that Wizards could theoretically have done. The fact that the OGL is a license owned by Wizards of the Coast, so they can revoke it at will, and their license will not be owned by them. They're going to craft it, and then they're going to set up a foundation, and that foundation will own it, and it won't have anybody from these companies on it. That's really interesting.
And that's the interesting thing about Wizards of the Coast finally releasing the SRD under Creative Commons license. They do not own Creative Commons.
Exactly.
They cannot undo that like they were trying to with the OGL. Now it's just out there.
And that's interesting because if they decide that that's going to replace the OGL, that's a big seismic shift here. And it could stabilize the exodus, but the exodus is real. People are... go ahead.
The problem is the exodus is already happening. It was happening before Wizards of the Coast came and made this, pretty big move to put the SRD out.
And not only that, because it was a length of time too, right? Like, there was about a month between it getting leaked and any really official response. And then
I think it was a few weeks. And then the first response was just bad. It was such a mess.
We rolled a 1.
It didn't help at all.
It helped in that it was like so bad that I think that somebody grabbed somebody and said, "You rolled a 1? Did you really? You rolled a 1? I want you to come up with an actual statement now." Because it was terrifyingly bad. It was sitting there like going, chuckle, huh? We're all gamers, right? And the rest of the people you're talking to are like, you just stabbed me in the foot, man.
Yeah, it's like when you get
chuckle, man. You stabbed me in the foot.
It's like when you have a gaming event and they've hired someone to like read the script and they're reading gamer jokes, but they don't understand gamers at all and it all comes out wrong. That's kind of what it felt like.
Wow. Nice callback to every BlizzCon for like the first 10 years of them.
But
Jay
mean,
Moore,
that
Jay
was-
Moore has no idea who we are.
But and I do want to go back to
God.
some of these companies that sort of started popping onto the Orc license or the Orc Alliance as it's called, and sort of had visceral reactions to it, right? Arcane Minis, who is one of the only producers of like Spelljammer-esque miniatures right now and has been for a little while, and one of the quickest funded 3D printing Kickstarters in the history of it happening. Bombshell Miniatures, Chaosium, makers of Call of Cthulhu, the DM Layer. We're talking about Evil Genius Games, Epic Miniatures, Fantasy Grounds, which is a virtual tabletop, Foundry VTT, Free RPG Day, which is an organization that works with all of the RPG companies to try to spread tabletop RPGs through local game stores and providing free product. Gale Force 9, who's been a titan in the tabletop industry for both wargaming and miniatures and tabletop role-playing forever. Like at least 2 decades, maybe 3 at this point. Goodman Games, Green Ronin, the Griffin Saddlebag, one of the content creators that is highlighted most regularly for their creation of 5th edition compatible magic items. Kobold Press, who's another large tabletop creator that uses 5th edition. These are not small companies. Monty Cook Games, of course, Paizo, Pinnacle Entertainment, who makes Savage Worlds. These are not small companies. These are literally every competitor for Wizards.
Hey, Roll20 is on this.
Roll20 is on this. Their official partner.
Yeah. So it is pretty astonishing to see, like, some of these companies you probably haven't heard of, but even the ones you haven't heard of have a pretty big role
and reputation
in all this. I mean, none of these companies are what I would call second raters. They're smaller, obviously, because everybody is smaller than Wizards. Wizards is again, as Joe pointed out, the 9,000-pound gorilla here. But absolutely, like Mad Cartographer.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen tons of Mad Cartographer stuff. They do amazing work. There's a lot going on here. When Liz basically mentioned that it's like a revolt and it may be too late to stop it. This goes back to what I was saying before about the goodwill that the OGL used to have. The OGL was trusted. People trusted it. They trusted that it would be there, and that when they were told that it would be irrevocable, that it would be. That you could always go back and use an older version. And now they realize, well, that's only true if Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, which owns Wizards of the Coast, don't decide to change it. And as a result, that goodwill and that trust has evaporated. And now nobody trusts Wizards, even though Wizards has done something and everybody who's talked about it has said, yes, this is a good move, but we're still going to do our thing. Like,
yeah,
the Orc Alliance is still going forth with their license. Kobold Press is still coming up with their own game system. Obviously, Paizo already has their own game system. But like the very fact that Chaosium is even involved in this, because Chaosium does not have a dog in this fight. Chaosium does not publish a lot of 5e stuff. I think they did one.
They have a small subset of Cthulhu books that were recently released under the 5th edition OGL.
Yeah. They did the Sandy Peterson stuff. Like Sandy Peterson presents monsters for, 5e type things. But them coming in, that's, Chaosium is one of the very few companies that's ever beaten Wizards of the Coast, although technically it was TSR at the time, in court. Like they went and said, you can't publish the Elric of Melnibone stuff because we have the Stormbringer game, and you absolutely can't publish Call of Cthulhu stuff because we have a Call of Cthulhu game.
That's where they switched to Star Children instead of Elder Gods and stuff like that.
Yeah. So there's going to be a lot of fallout to this for years, and I don't see a path for Wizards to come out of it. Like, this is not going to be a blip. This is not just, ooh, we had a hiccup. We rolled a 1, guys. Sorry. No. Y'all didn't just roll a 1. You showed up at the game drunk and you peed all over everybody. Because that's the level of outrage we're looking at here.
And the other aspect of that is this is a community that is not quick to forget. We're like, tabletop players remember things that happened in tabletop games 30 years ago. They may not remember their own like name some days, or where they live, or maybe how they got to work or whatever, but they'll remember that time that they crit on the vampire lord in the crypt at the pivotal moment to save the day, or things like that. We don't forget this. And like, it's it is going to have long repercussions, right? And part of it, I think, is actually, and here's sort of the silver lining, it's a good thing. And here's why I'm going to say that. Now you have people who are doubling their efforts and using this to showcase what else is out there. Because this is, D&D is sort of, again, it's the quintessential tabletop game. It's what everybody knows. It is the thing that whenever somebody talks about tabletop roleplay, they always think of Dungeons and Dragons. It's almost synonymous in use with it. But there's so many games out there, and we've talked about them before. We've covered them on the website, and we'll continue to talk about them and play them on our live plays when we get the opportunity to. And now people are starting to branch out because they're starting to realize this stuff might be taken away from me, or they're realizing what we talked about at the beginning. They can't keep up with the rate of print production, or they can't keep up with Wizards and their monetization of the product. So they're looking at other things. And I see it. Yeah. And I see it at the store level, right? Like, we're making a decision to not order new books for D&D because our player base has stopped asking about them, and we'll special order them when asked for it. But we're not going out of our way. We've reached out to like companies like Paizo or any of the Magpie and all of the other various tabletop producers that have deals in place.
I'll tell you right
bring
now,
their stuff in, right?
Yeah, right now, if Magpie manages to capitalize on the fact that they probably have the most popular IP ever in gaming as a game that they have, if the Avatar game, they need to capitalize on that because this is the time to do it.
Yeah.
And people who don't care at all about role playing games wanted an Avatar role playing game.
Yeah, and there's
though I will say one other thing before you come in. If you are burned out or feel like you can't keep up with Wizards of the Coast release schedule, I am not sure Paizo is any better for you. Like those guys drop a lot of books.
But their content is also relatively free in a lot of cases too. Sorry, go ahead, Liz.
I was actually, I kind of keep a calendar of upcoming releases, and I was like, I should keep a closer eye on other gaming companies because I really think we're gonna see other companies flourishing in this environment. And I was looking up the upcoming releases schedule for Paizo, and it's like 3 books a month, and I'm like, no, if there's a month, there's stuff coming out.
Yeah, and some of that is. I was going to say, some of that's a adventure path, though, too, right? Like,
some of it is in the adventure path, which is the big deal about how Pathfinder works as opposed to D&D. Instead of having the collections like the Vault, they have like the adventure path, which will be an adventure coming out every couple of months until the whole thing is out. And it's basically a campaign that you can play as individual adventures.
And then the book comes out afterwards, which is the consolidation of it.
Yeah, but at the same time, Paizo does not. They are machines. They put out a lot of stuff. So that's just something I felt like needs to be said.
Now, the one thing that I did want to talk about though too is real quick, and I wanted to switch gears a little bit. When we talk about that this is going to be long reaching, it's still going on, right? Like, to say that we haven't forgotten about it, it's hard to, because now you have like Kyle Brink, who was at the face of a lot of the communication after the leak and was sort of kind of thrown out there to sort of fall on the sword for everybody, is now making the rounds for interviews, right? They're going to start seeing interviews popping up everywhere. In fact, I want to shout out 3 Black Halflings, which is a great podcast on the HeadGum Network, and absolutely hilarious live play. They're fantastic folks. Normally, I don't shill other people's stuff very often, but go listen to their stuff. But they had Kyle Brink on there, and they had an interview, and it was a good long interview. It was an hour and 20 minutes. And there was nothing, quote unquote, off the table. And while I'm not going to recount an entire hour and 20 minute interview, I highly recommend you go to their YouTube channel and read it. There was some takeaways from that. One is that the OGL fiasco is far reaching. Like, it caught the attention of not just Wizards of the Coast executives, but Hasbro executives and their shareholders. They are now keenly aware of the level of their misstep, and they are trying to run damage control and doing so unsuccessfully. 2, there is a lot of speech being in there that, Kyle is saying, like, I should have had more of my team on there and involved and stuff like that, but it almost feels forced, which again, could be the corporate line that he's being told to toe. I don't know Kyle. I don't know him from, random dude on the street. So I don't know him personally or anything like that. Three, that they're a lot of this is that the only thing that made them react is the money situation. It was how much they were losing on D&D Beyond, how much was going back from that, and that there's probably going to be more oversight now on the product and what happens. That's really like the big highlights from there, as far as I'm concerned, but we're going to see more of it. We're going to see more conversations. We're going to see them talk about how they messed up, and they're going to try to do the whole thing where they maybe try to clean up their reputation a bit. But even like, and again, shout out the 3 Black Halflings. They were not backing down from asking the hard questions about that and really representing the community of, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? It's interesting. So I don't know how do you guys feel about what they're doing with their PR campaign right now, or, anything like that. So I'll kick it over to you to get your thoughts on where they're at currently. And I guess we'll start with Liz.
They're just going to have to make a massive effort to regain the trust they've lost. It takes a long time to build trust and build community and to build what D&D had, but it can be lost in an instant by having this leak and letting it go for so long without any kind of response, and then having this tone-deaf response and going just weeks and weeks without stepping in to do anything about it. They did finally come to the right decision. They put out the SRD under Creative Commons. That's the best thing they could have done for themselves, for the game, and for the community. But it took too long to get there, and they made a lot of missteps along the way. To regain that trust, it's going to take years, and it's going to take a lot of effort. They're going to have to get out in front of people and say, hey, we do care about the community. We want you to create content for D&D. We want you to play D&D. We want to support you in doing those things. I think they're doing the right thing, but it's going to take a lot of time to even just get back to where they were before this started.
Do you think the covenant has just been, it really is a covenant, right? Like the covenant's just been broken, right? Like, and I'll kick it over to Matt. Like you mentioned earlier that people relied on the strength of the OGL, and this showed is actually like in essence how fragile that really is.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it in other ways throughout life that sometimes things that you think are ironclad are really just kind of like gentlemen's agreements, and the only thing holding them together is people's belief in them. The OGL here is definitely going through a situation like that, where the initial response by a lot of people who drafted and helped to get the OGL created was, wait, you can't do that. Like it's not, we deliberately set it up so you couldn't do that.
Like what Lisa Stevens and Jim Butler, right? And then Brian Lewis.
Brian Lewis, and then of course Ryan Dancy.
These are all folks that were there at Wizards when the OGL 1.0 was created.
Yeah, and so when that happened, Liz is really right. Everything Liz said is right. I don't want to just repeat it, but the thing I'm going to focus on is this idea that when you break something, when you knock the thing off the pedestal and it smashes, all the glue in the world ain't gonna make it the way it was. There's a Japanese art, and I can never remember the name of it, but when they have broken pottery, they will actually put it back together with gold so the breaks and cracks are visible, so people can see them. Because there's no point in trying to repair it so that that it's seamless. You can't do that. You can only acknowledge what happened. That's where we are right now with Wizards of the Coast and the community. And I've seen a lot of people that I used to watch for D&D content are moving to other games or just they're not doing anything. Like there's a lot of uncertainty even now. There's a lot of uncertainty in the community. I mean, yes, the SRD move for the 5th edition SRD going to Creative Commons, that's great. But I mean, there's also stuff like Wizards is still obviously eyeing VTTs and does not like virtual tabletops because and wants to make their own.
Yeah, because they're actively producing their own.
And then now stuff has come out from interviews that the entire reason they bought D&D Beyond was to destroy it, which is like, I mean, the idea of buying D&D Beyond because you hate it and you want to get rid of it and replace it with your own, it's like, no, you just bought it. Now it is your own. You don't have to do anything. Like, just what?
I mean,
what am I hearing here? Like, this makes no sense. And so there's a lot of stuff going on. Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
I mean, I really felt that they did buy it to, integrate it and become their official thing because they didn't have anything like this. It would have taken years to develop something that was even on the same level. So it's like, do the big corporate thing and just buy it and then own it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the thing is that makes sense, and I think it's what a lot of people involved thought was going on. But they were still making internally their D&D Beyond replacement. Still even after they bought it, it's still under development.
It's like Project Open Sky or something like that.
Yeah, and that's just this. There's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that we don't really know. We're not getting that is still obviously affecting the path forward. And I think the community has proved that if Wizards calls their bluff, they will straight up leave. Like the companies that have been supporting them through using the OGL will make their own, are going to make their own no matter what. So they have security. So they don't have to worry about Wizards deciding they don't like it that people publish things and will stop them. Like there is not going to be the way it was is not the way it will be. Let me just stop with that. That's what my big takeaway is. These things have changed. It's different now, and it will continue to be going forward.
You're saying, Liz?
I mean, Paizo has specifically gone out and said we are willing to fight Wizards in court if they decide to, make an issue about this, decide to try and revoke things, because that wasn't the spirit of the original agreement. So we know there are companies out there who are going to stand up and say, no, this is not okay. This is not what was ever meant to happen with this. And we've seen that there are other companies. This has given so much visibility to other companies out there, to all of these small press publishers that, now
and content
that,
creators.
As Joe was saying, now that the covenant has been broken, it really opens the floodgates for these other content creators to get out there and show us all what they can do, what they have to offer, because I think if nothing else, this has made everyone in the industry, maybe people who were mainly interested in D&D, mainly participated in the D&D community, that there's a lot else out there. If Wizards of the Coast had decided to shut the OGL down and to lock out a lot of independent content creators, they have other options. They have a lot of games out there. And that's something.
Go ahead.
That's just something I don't think the community as a whole necessarily realized, because a lot of people have come into D&D because of the community, because they were watching Critical Role, because they saw this on YouTube from someone, and then they started getting into the game, and they may not be aware of how much is out there. This just offers so much opportunity for the growth of other companies, and I think that's going to be really interesting.
And I was going to say, anecdotally, and there are some hard numbers here as well. There's evidence of this, right? A lot of these companies are going on emergency print runs to get copies of their books out because during this time frame, Paizo sold out their entire printing that was currently available of Pathfinder books everywhere. And anecdotally, I know that to be fact because I can't get them in. They're on delay, and we sold out completely because, and I mentioned this last time, but it's still going on. We still get people who are coming in to the store and asking, what else is there? What else can I play? What other things are like this, but maybe, a little bit different, like point me in a direction. I've seen more Powered by the Apocalypse books, like Monster of the Week, sold in the last month than I have in the last year. I've seen more people pick up Starfinder, a game that came out in 2017, and is arguably the blueprint for Pathfinder 2nd edition, but that's a whole other podcast. That isn't nearly the player base that Pathfinder is. Those books are all selling out too. Pathfinder, obviously, people are buying Cobalt Press stuff, which are they have rules agnostics books with deities and campaigns and magic spells and potions and brewing, and those books are flying off the shelves too. And it's interesting because all these people that maybe ignored that section of the bookstore to go grab the latest D&D supplement are starting to realize that they're, like Liz is saying, there's so much more out there. And in some cases, so much more you can buy with that same $50. And I want to throw that out there too, because like D&D is expensive. Buying those books is expensive. We didn't talk about this earlier. We talked about the crushing flow of content, but in the US, that's $50 a book average, right? There's no soft cover version. If you buy a digital version, you might get it for $30, but it's a digital version. You can't hold it. And then you have companies like Paizo, who, again, they're a company. They're going to make money. The hardcover book, yeah, is it $50-$60? Yes. They have a softcover version called the Pocket Edition. It's the same book, 600 pages, slightly smaller, and it's $30. So for that same $50-$60, you can get the core rule book and the advanced player's guide, which also comes in pocket form. All of their books come in a smaller form that are cheaper, which is a slightly lower barrier. And I'm sure Matt's going to correct me on this if I don't say it, but there are also these companies that offer their core rules just for free off the bat. Like Pathfinder. Yeah. Go ahead. Talk about what they offer for free, right?
Well, Pathfinder you can go to the, just one example, there's the Archives of Nethys site that has the system reference documents for Pathfinder 1st edition, Pathfinder 2nd edition, and Starfinder. You can just get any information that's in any Pathfinder book about this game, you can get from that site. It's completely stripped of flavor text. It doesn't like have any of the what they call crunch, but it has all the rules you would need to run it, and it's completely free, and it's online. You can just go get it anytime you want. That's just one company doing that. Green Ronin has a whole bunch of stuff they do like that too. They're M&M Superlink type stuff.
And there's software companies like Demiplane, which is starting to get into a little bit of prominence, because they're an alternative to D&D Beyond that are starting to gain traction. Not only did they land a deal with Magpie to do their Avatar stuff, Paizo's putting their Pathfinder and eventually their Starfinder content there, including character creation, character information, and things like that.
They even got Vampire.
Yeah.
Which is a company we haven't really talked much, but yeah. One of the things before I think we're getting close to moving on. But I want to mention, I've seen a lot of interesting indie stuff that is kind of like looking at Dungeons and Dragons, and it isn't making a D&D like game, but it's sort of making a reaction game to D&D. Like the one I linked in the D&D channel for the people who work here, is the Icon playtest. It was created by the guy who created Lancer, which is one of those indie games that everybody seems to love. And it's like
indie mech battle game, by the way, for Lancer.
Yeah, and it's kind of like you become it's like looking at the whole adventurers who explore dungeons and do stuff, and it's like, what if you made that the core assumption of the world, that this is something that happens, that there are people who just professionally go raid tombs and ancient dungeons and bring back treasure and loot, and you make that part of the world. And it's interesting to see it coming from like a singular vision, because D&D has not been from a singular vision in a very long time. And when it was from a singular vision, it wasn't necessarily the best singular vision. There's some stuff Gary put in the game that's really weird. Gary, I know you're dead, but you put some weird stuff in there, Gary.
So
I
do want to take the opportunity, because we are coming up on time, though, to sort of gather our final thoughts. And I want to start with Liz. So if you wanted to either summarize your thoughts or where you're at with this all, or what you want to impart to our listeners, what would you say right now about all this and what they have to look forward to in the future?
I think this is a really exciting time for TTRPGs. And it seems a little weird to say that, because it's all come from Wizards of the Coast making a huge bumbling mistake. But I think it's opened up so much opportunity. There are so many small press publishers who are going to get a chance to get attention, to get their books out there. And it's also going to mean that Wizards of the Coast is going to have to try harder to make really good content to compete. Because it's not just that they can release a book and it's a D&D book and everyone's going to buy it, because now everyone's really, really aware that there are other things out there. There's a lot of other stuff they could play that is great. So I think it's a really exciting time. I think we're going to see a lot of cool games and adventures out there very soon.
Matt, what about you?
I think if I was trying to sum up everything, it would be that it's interesting, and it kind of reminds me of that thing, like, Like the only thing big enough to kill X is X. Wizards of the Coast probably had an absolutely unchallengeable domination of the space, and the only thing that could possibly have stopped them was them doing this, which you would think like they wouldn't because it would hurt, but apparently they did because they believed they were completely unchallengeable to the point where they could do this and get away with it. And on the face of it, there is no reason that they shouldn't have. There's the idea that the entire hobby would rise up as one and go, what? Just wouldn't occur to me. I did not see that coming. I did not see the level of, and I should, because I know role-playing people, we're all cantankerous. I should not have been surprised, but I was, because I'm so used to corporations just doing this kind of thing and getting away with it, that seeing this straight up uprising
and how swift it was.
Yeah, how swift it was, how strident it was. Like there was not a lot of dithering. Like going to YouTube at one point, going to YouTube in January was just video after video after video of people like losing their minds, and YouTube's algorithm couldn't wait to show them to me. It was like, hey, you like Dungeons and Dragons? Look at this person's anguish. I'm like, I don't want to see his anguish. I want to see him having fun playing a game. But I guess I can't blame you for this. I have to blame Wizards. So there we are. So yeah, this was wholly avoidable. And getting, as Liz said, climbing back from this is going to be a task. And in the meantime, I really hope you're right, and that we get a lot more diversity, not just in terms of diversity and the people represented and so forth, but straight up diverse games where we do more than just raiding dungeons. Where there's a lot of other stuff you can do in a role playing game.
And there's a lot of different genres to explore too that are out there that aren't just fantasy.
Different systems, different genres. There's all sorts of stuff you can do. So that's where my takeaway is.
I want to jump in here with a little thing. Is you mentioned diversity, and one of the things about diversity is seeing people of different races, seeing people of different backgrounds in our games, seeing that everyone can be a hero. And D&D is trying to make their game more diverse. They've been working on it, but sometimes they still make some pretty significant missteps here. So I think by opening this up to more game companies, we're also going to see more diverse content. We're going to see more people just producing more stuff, because D&D does have its specific vision, and it's a limited vision because it's, one company's vision and direction.
And I wanted to add one last thing here at the end too, with my final thoughts, because everything Liz and Matt said is absolutely accurate. Another thing I want to say is, don't feel bad about still playing D&D, right? And that's another thing that we didn't really talk about a whole lot, but there has been some backlash, not as much as some other games out there. But if you play and enjoy the game and you have the books, you can still play and enjoy the game. Like, the stories you tell are still your own. The stories that you share with your friends and your adventuring party are still yours. They're your memories to make. They're your time to spend with your friends. And if that continues to be Dungeons and Dragons where you sit down at the table, go ahead. There's groups that come to my store of old timers that have been playing since the red boxes, right? They still play the old boxes. There's people that still play second edition out there. There's people that still play GURPS and games that existed in time immemorial. There's still people that play the Marvel D6 role-playing game from way back when. You can play whatever you want as long as you are enjoying yourself and telling your stories. And use this as an opportunity to sort of internalize that a little bit, I guess you would say. Like, if you want to branch out, go ahead. If you want to stay where you're comfortable, go ahead, but stay vigilant, right? Make sure that you're paying attention to what's going on around you. Like, we're talking about diversification and things like that. Maybe if you want to try something, or you're looking for a little more adventure, or you're looking for a little more fantasy plus, try Pathfinder, see if you like it. Or maybe if you want to see what, Starjammer or Spelljammer could have been with Starfinder, go for it. There's no real wrong answer here, as long as you are still enjoying what you're doing. And at the end of the day, really, no company can take that away from you. All right, I think that's going to do it for us today, unless there's anything else either of you want to add.
No, I'm good.
Do If you do want to try out Pathfinder, there is a humble bundle right now with a massive amount of Pathfinder content. You can get just a ton of books digitally.
Yep. I'm going to say straight up, I think Pathfinder 2nd Edition is one of the best role-playing games of the past 10 years. I really think it's a great system.
And
I've written posts about it. I've talked about it. It's really good. But there are also other good games. I mean, Powered by the Apocalypse is a very flexible system, and it's one that was created basically for other people to use from the beginning. And it's going to be what Avatar uses. Is what Avatar is using, because Avatar's out now, right?
Yes.
It is officially out.
Yeah.
That's the other thing about the Canton hobby
right
right now. You know, that the hobby right now is basically constantly happening, so it's very hard to keep track of. But yeah, there's a ton of good stuff. So.
All right, friends. Well, I do want to thank you for joining us for this edition of Tavern Watch with Blizzard Watch, because these shows are made possible due to your generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, a better chance at having your question answered on our podcast for the Q and an ads-free site experience. I do want to take this opportunity to remind you that we do produce tabletop content here on the Tavern Watch imprint. And as a matter of fact, we're getting ready to record another episode in which you can see exactly what co-DM Matt has in store for us, which is an interesting experience if you haven't listened to it, and I highly recommend you do. The Into the Weir series is a co-DM experience where Matt and I trade off between adventure arcs, and seeing how the stories evolved between the two of us has definitely been entertaining for me, and I hope it's been entertaining for you. Also, stay tuned to our other podcasts like Lore Watch and the Blizzard Watch podcast as we continue to try to bring you entertaining content. And with that, folks, we'll see you next time.